It's confirmed. We have new details on the Malignant Heart straight from the horse's mouth, well, the Diablo official Twitter's mouth, and we know exactly what to expect and how to plan our builds. Do we know how to plan our builds? Are we scared of what's going to happen since we cannot use some of the jewelry armor sockets? Well, I'm sorry, sorceresses, but let's take a look at what the hearts will be. So we knew from the dev interview live stream that we had earlier this week, last week, definitely last week, is that there are 4 different types of hearts with one that's a little bit more generic. And since hearts go into sockets, and we know from the previous video, by the way, that you could have checked on our channel, that in the jewelry, rings and amulets, the hearts will replace the sockets that were used by skulls, aka we're going to be losing the armor that we so desperately needed in high world tier 4 to survive. It's been a little bit of a worry, especially for the sorceresses of the game. But listen, as I called it yesterday without actually knowing all the details, we have defensive hearts as well, because it just makes sense, right? One of the hearts we're gonna cover the first here is the Brutal Heart. The Brutal Heart is a defensive power, just, you know, iterate what they've already released, and it drops from brutal malignant monsters or crafted via Cormon's wagon. Now, obviously, we don't know what the actual effect is, and obviously the effect has already been most likely designed since they have been working on the Season 1 mechanic for quite a while as the game was also being shipped. Now, we know for sure that some of the defensive aspects of the game are not particularly good, like the resistances to elements, which are bad. They're very bad. They're so bad that you're probably better off never having any resistance on your gear ever, or maybe like 1 instance of resistance and that's about it. Considering that this information has been made kind of public throughout the beta, there's a slight chance that some Brutal Hearts might have some resistances on them. I hope not. Or I hope they tweak it so that resistance can just offer flat damage reduction from the specific element instead of scaling multiplicative ways that we have now, where it just ends up having massive diminishing returns and just wasted stats on gear. Because the resistances do actually matter to an extent, although pretty much most people die from those corpse bows in dungeons that just shoot from a room away and chunk 90% of your HP. I am a sad victim of such corpse bows. But there's also a very good chance that some of the Brutal Hearts will be armor focused to replace the armor that we lost through the skulls, and likely, hopefully, ideally, more armor than the skulls would have provided, because it is a season. Usually things in season scale higher than the Undecillion damage numbers that we've seen so far from people on the Eternal Realm. I don't even know where this is going to be going, but we can probably rest assured that there's going to be some toughness. So for sorcerers and sorcerers that were worried, because not only was this announced a couple of hours ago, not long after it was announced, we also have a meme on Reddit, and probably for good reason, where they've data mined the 5th heart. Hence, there is no 5th heart, but the 5th heart could just as well be the sorcerer tiers. Ultimate power drops from the eyes of sorcerers and sorceresses who are too squishy to do tier 55 solo nightmare. Dear Lord, man. We shouldn't have this situation in the game permeating through a specific class where it's too squishy. Obviously, that's not 100% true. Obviously, sorcerers can be tanky, but probably not as tanky as the other classes, which is something that they should definitely address, and hopefully they can tune the tuning knobs of the numbers of the hearts can be tweaked in such a way where it can compensate some classes' defensives. But obviously, that's not the only heart that we have. We also know the Vicious Heart, which is the offensive power. This will likely give offensive power clearly. Stats, maybe from what we know so far in terms of stats, some of the best ones are crit damage with certain skills or certain elemental types that your class does. Vulnerable damage, of course, damage to stunned or crowd control enemies in such a way. We can probably expect some of these to be on the Vicious Heart if we're gonna have just pure stats. Obviously, they're gonna have some interactions with resources, with skills, and so on and so forth, since they did mention that it's gonna be similar to legendary aspects in terms of, first of all, power and likely effect, although I would be surprised if all of the 32 heart systems will have just pure legendary effects and not just some of them being a little bit more bland, a little bit more generic, a little bit more straightforward as to just give you crit, for instance. We also have the Devious Heart, which is the utility power heart, drops from devious malignant monsters or crafted via Cormon's Wagon. All of them pretty much drop from their named type of Malignant monsters or crafted through Cormon's Wagon, which is something that we're definitely going to be doing. Now, what does utility power mean? Well, it could probably very likely mean crowd control things, to apply stuns, slows, or anything like that, to root things, immobilize, and all of those things that kind of enable your offensive power to kick in. Now, some cool things that they could do with the Devious Heart is to also make it apply vulnerable. Not every class has a really easy accessible ways to get to vulnerable, and some classes kind of have to move around the grain to get vulnerable, although it's not like the end of the world. But for instance, Necromancer can get vulnerable through its corpse tendrils, while other classes like Sorceresses have more access to vulnerable damage. So hopefully some of this can offset some class weaknesses, some holes in their kit that can make them a little bit better. And like they mentioned also, if anything regarding to the systems in seasons, if anything stands out, it feels like it's a good addition to the game, they will probably implement it as a permanent change to the game. So obviously the Malignant Heart is a good way to figure out, oh, are we going to be able to keep this as a thing in the game post season 1? And lastly, we have the Wrathful Heart, which is the superpower. We know for sure that Wrathful Hearts go in all socket types, because if we look at all of the hearts so far, the Vicious Heart is, I guess, red-orange, while the Brutal Heart is blue, and Devious Heart is purple-pinkish, right? And we know that the heart sockets will all be colored in a way to make room for these hearts, and outside of jewelry, all of the other armor slots and weapon slots will still have the regular sockets as well. And the Malignant sockets, or if that's what their name is going to be, are going to be colored in the way where you can use these two. But the Wrathful Heart can go into any socket, period, which is great. Now, this is called, or quoted rather, superpower. We don't know what superpower means, but they did mention that they don't really want to design the system, or they didn't design the system in a way where people feel like they need to stack just Wrathful Hearts. So either there's very few of them, either their mechanics don't stack, either you can only be limited to 1 or 2 or 3, or they drop so rare that you just don't have them. But I can probably see that one person farming 15 Wrathful Hearts in all their sockets. But obviously, having all of them be Wrathful Hearts is definitely not the goal. Whatever way they will implement to make sure that we don't stack them will probably be in the game one way or another. Being a superpower makes it exciting. I feel like this could be the equivalent of uniques in terms of Malignant Hearts, having that one defining superpower, maybe 2 of them, that can kind of change a little bit how your spec plays. That would be, or spec rather, class. Oh, too much World of Warcraft. It would be really cool, and we are actually going to be very excited to see exactly what's going to happen and how they're going to be implemented. All in all, the season is very close to being released, and we get little breadcrumbs of information, little carrots on the stick to kind of get us a little bit more excited and a little bit more hyped for the season. There are obviously concerns with the number tunings that we've had recently, where we know, once again, that people have reached some crazy scaling numbers going into the high-end World Tier 4 Nightmare Dungeons, where people are just doing outrageous amounts of damage. And the fact that the devs did mention, although I don't know how much it still matters now, that they don't want the numbers in Diablo 4 to reach the ridiculous amounts of numbers in Diablo 3. And I think we already passed that with the meme with the Undecillion Barbarian crit, was it? I think it was a Hammer of the Ancients or something like that. So either if it was a bug or a weird scaling issue, they might and hopefully will probably tune that. But to give a little bit of hope, or copium rather, the devs have been pretty on point with number tuning all of the mechanics, all of the effects, all of the legendaries and spells and abilities, even if by increments of like 1 to 3 to 4% at a time, which is obviously really good because you don't want to overly nerf or overly buff, rather overly nerf certain classes that people have come to actually be pushing the content with. And I think that the Brutal or Malignant Hearts rather will be susceptible to the same style of tuning. So although there are worries that, for instance, the Brutal Heart might not provide enough tankiness for people to be able to survive, to compensate the lack of armor, to compensate the lack of pure defensiveness outside of the missing armor while going into a level 100 World Tier 4, because people are still dying even with some of the best gear, which maybe that's not that bad. Maybe that's how Diablo should be. We shouldn't be immortal. That's just boring. That's just Nephilims from Diablo 3. And nobody really likes that. But on top of all of this, we know that we're gonna have bug fixes and the class tunings and nerfs that are probably gonna be coming in the next couple of days as a heads up for people probably changing or choosing their main. I still haven't decided if I'm going to be maining Druid, if I'm going to be maining Necromancer, if I'm going to play a class that I haven't played so far. I'm kind of waiting for the patch notes to see. And hey, while you're waiting for the patch notes, you can also see this video and check it out because it's actually really cool and it helps you understand more about what is actually fun in terms of classes, at least from our perspective here at Diablo Forever, to, you know, kind of get a hint as maybe some people like classes for different reasons. But hey, thank you for watching the video. See you next time.